I am Kate Dalinger. I'm the Director of Fellowship Programs in Wellesley College. I'm joined by my colleague, Caitlin, and by a fabulous group of speakers. Without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Michaela Moore for this panel on demystifying the Marshall Scholarship. Thank you all so much for being here.
Hi, everybody. My name is Michaela. I'm a 2020 Marshall Scholar, so I'm in London right now. I'm a graduate of Howard University, where I study biology, and right now I'm getting my master's in medical anthropology at SOAS University of London. I'm really excited to speak to you all today. Please know this is a safe space. There are no stupid questions, no small questions. And because it's such an intimate atmosphere, you can feel free to raise your hand, speak if you have a question, type in the chat. We really just want to get to know you guys and help answer as many questions as you have. So without further ado, I'll shut up. And I want to let our amazing Marshall panelists go ahead and introduce themselves personally.
I guess I can start by introducing myself. So my name is Emily Rutherford. I was a Marshall Scholar in 2012 to 2014. I did my undergrad at Princeton. On the Marshall, I did a 2-year master's in modern British and European history at Oxford. I then went back to the US to do my PhD in British history at Columbia. And now I am a postdoc back in Oxford again. And, you know, one of the things that we can talk about is how many of us wind up having transatlantic trajectories over a longer period of time after having done this fellowship. And my research focuses on gender and sexuality in modern Britain. And outside of work, I'm involved in Oxford Mutual Aid, which is an organization providing food support to people in need in Oxford, and in sort of various LGBTQ activism and community initiatives in the local community.
Thanks, Emily. Hi, everyone. I'm Becca Farnham. I was also a 2012 Marshall Scholar. Much the same trajectory as Emily, except I didn't manage to make it back to the US for my PhD. I've just been in the UK the entire time. I study environmental peace building, so I'm interested in how communities connect and partner with nature for kind of bridging tensions and alleviating gaps around the world. I currently teach for Syracuse University, that New York University, but at our British Study Abroad campus in London. My classes focus on sustainability, environmental justice, and anti-racism. I had a wonderful time with the Marshall. I actually moved over very specifically as a result of my undergraduate thesis at Michigan State, which looked at food and water politics in the Middle East. And while I was doing some of that research, I kind of read about a British professor's work that really fit in well, sent an email kind of out of the blue. He responded really happily saying, "We've just launched a program, why don't you come study?" And that very much kind of formed the basis of my Marshall application, and had a wonderful time with him as a mentor, and went on to study at East Anglia, which is a little lesser known as a British university. It's northeast of Cambridge in England's kind of agricultural county. I then did an LLM, a law degree in Scotland at the University of Edinburgh, and a PhD in geography at King's College London. So kind of have been around this part of the island, have not studied yet formally in Northern Ireland, but who knows, we'll get there eventually when I decide I need a second PhD. Really lovely to be with all of you today, and looking forward to talking about kind of how you might get here or wherever else life has in store for you next. Kate.
Thanks, yeah, great to be here. Kate Weber. I was a 2007 Marshall, so a little bit further back than others here. I did a PhD in molecular biology when I was in the UK. I kind of went into the Marshall Scholarship thinking that I would be an academic. I went to the University of Richmond for my undergraduate degree, which is a private liberal arts college, and I wanted to teach at a liberal arts college. And then I think partially through my exposure to all of the amazing Marshalls in many other fields when I was in the UK, realized that my interests lie more at the kind of connection between science and society, and in particular policymaking. And I moved back to DC. I did a couple of fellowships in science policy, working first for a scientific society and then for the Department of State, where I was working on multilateral agreements and kind of foreign aid for pollution-related issues, so air pollution, chemicals management, waste management. And now I work at Google on the sort of connecting policy and our research organization. Google has a pretty significant, we invest billions of dollars a year in kind of more fundamental research. We have a lot of researchers who operate a little bit more like academics and further removed from our products. And so I work with them on thinking about what their work means for current and future policy making, talking to policymakers about what we are doing, and yeah, just sort of generally engaging on tech and R&D policy. So like the connective tissue in all of that is I'm interested in the connections between science and society, but as you can see, it's taken me on a little bit of a winding road. And yeah, looking forward to chatting with all of you about next steps and questions, etc.
Yeah, no, that's so awesome. We have, as you guys can see, like a wide variety of interests and paths here. But I think one thing we all have in common is that we were exactly in you all students' shoes at some point with a million questions and kind of maybe even no idea about how to get here, or even if we could. And so my first question for the panel is, how did you get introduced to the Marshall Scholarship, and what made you want to apply, and how did that go?
I had to overcome a lot of personal skepticism and cynicism about it, and so maybe I can speak to that. So I think that, and I don't know if you guys' experiences at Wellesley are similar to this, but I think my experience at Princeton being a very sort of elite competitive university, there was a lot of emphasis on kind of the winning of awards and a lot of competition among the kind of students who were very like academically serious and motivated and whatever around that. And a lot of pressure from the university to sort of funnel students who had been academically successful into that process so that they would win awards and make the university look good. And in that context, I was aggressively recruited to apply for prestigious fellowships. I was very hostile to that idea, was very rude to the fellowships advisor when she reached out to me about it, and subsequently had to send my senior thesis advisor to have lunch with her to apologize, because that was how rude to her I was. And it was, I had a preconception that something like the Marshall wasn't going to be for people like me who wanted to go to grad school and who were humanities academics and, pretty much just wanted an academic career. And that perception has certainly not been borne out in reality, as you've already seen from us. All kinds of people are Marshall scholars and pursue other fellowship opportunities in the UK and elsewhere. But I think, and in fact, the thing that changed my mind about it and that made me send my senior thesis advisor to go have lunch with the fellowships advisor was my realizing that actually this could be a vehicle to go to graduate school, right? And what I see the Marshall as, and what I would actually encourage everyone to think of this and other prestigious fellowship opportunities as, are like not a prize that you win now while you're in college, but an opportunity to go do something else. And that opportunity is funding to pursue a graduate degree, right? That's what it is. And so, this may not be for you if you don't want to go to graduate school, right? But if you are interested in the idea of going to graduate school, and that doesn't mean committing to a long-term life in academia, right? It means doing a master's degree or a couple master's degrees, right? But if that's something that you maybe are interested in, right? You're open to the idea, you're not sure what you want to do yet, you want to explore a new field that you haven't had the opportunity yet to explore, something that's sort of adjacent to what you've done in college and your sort of interests in your career trajectory and whatever, this is an opportunity to do that. It's an opportunity to sort of also have an international experience, have that experience of living in another country and engaging with a different culture, the UK is more different to America than you might realize. We can talk about that if people are interested. And so what I'm trying to say is that it's really what you make of it, and that the sort of preconceptions that I had about it when I was in college were kind of limited use, because, you can do any number of things. You can do like any degree that possibly exists in the UK with this opportunity. And, you can engage with the fellowship program and that experience of like having a prestigious American fellowship, like to the extent that you want and feel comfortable, right? But you can also just be like, oh, I'm a student at a British university and I'm having that educational experience. And I think I sort of fell more into the latter camp, to be honest.
I can go next this time. So I had a little bit of a different experience because I was not at what I would consider to be like an elite university where these scholarships were well known. So I didn't know anything about the Marshall Scholarship. I had some vague knowledge, I guess, of the Rhodes Scholarship. And we didn't have, it's great that you guys have access to this kind of an event, because there was also no kind of structured program for telling students about the scholarships at the time, at least. So what happened for me was I wanted to go to graduate school to get a PhD, and I was applying to US universities, and I knew one of the deans at the University of Richmond, and he said, you should really consider applying for these competitive scholarships to go to the UK. It had never even occurred to me, but there were plenty of great opportunities in my field to get a PhD in the UK. So I sort of figured, why not? To Emily's point of how you think about the scholarship, I definitely thought about it as a route to get a PhD and also to experience living in the UK. It wasn't really until I started as a Marshall Scholar that I came to appreciate all of the other kind of connotations that it has. And in the end, also some of that was really positive for me, but it's not the way that I came to the opportunity. When I started to look up the Marshall Scholarship, when this dean told me I should apply, my first thought was there's no way that I'm qualified for this. But he sort of convinced me, and thankfully was willing to work with me on my application and sort of how to present myself and frankly sell myself in a way that I wasn't super comfortable doing at the time.
And I shared a little bit in my bio about how, I came and was attracted to the Marshall Scholarship because of this particular professor and this one very specific degree program. So I had the UK and graduate school in the UK on my mind for quite a while. But I think I also want to say the Marshall was floated to me very early in my undergraduate experience at Michigan State by a few professors who worked with the Honors College and our version of Kate and Caitlin there at Michigan State. But I was also applying for the Marshall, or looking at applying for the Marshall, right after having just not gotten the Truman. So I also really want to say that there are a lot of things to apply to in the world, and this is just one of them, and everything else you've ever applied to is just one of them. And it's not getting accepted to one or not receiving one particular kind of award, even if it feels like it's kind of in the same trajectory and path or the same kind of prestige, doesn't actually mean anything about applying for another, because they're looking for slightly different cohorts, diversity, and you've changed since you did that last application, and all kinds of things in terms of the kind of funny mishmash of factors that go into whoever eventually is selected for these kind of things. So please do not allow your kind of past experience or kind of outcome potentially of applications to taint that, or kind of what you may feel like going into the process, because it really is an incredibly valuable process and of course experience for those many of us, and I think all of us here on this call, but it's really important that you see yourself as someone who should, and we hope is encouraged to and feels worthy to apply for this, because you absolutely are, or you wouldn't be here. right? And the Marshall application is open to all, and we really, really want everyone to apply, because also as you're applying, a lot of that process will help you figure out, is grad school right for me? Is this program right for me? Right? And the conversations you'll have with Kate, with your professors, with others, will so shape kind of where you end up, right? And I like completely changed my second year, plans as a result of this and whatnot. So I think that's kind of where I would say my headspace was at when I was beginning to apply.
Yeah, you all touched on some really, really good points. And I think what you all exemplified very well is that almost every Marshall kind of came at the Marshall at a different angle with different goals, different things that they wanted to get from it. And so I hope that was like well relayed, and that you all, like, as students, can receive that. Is that, I mean, for me, I really just wanted to get out of the country. Like, I didn't care if it was graduate school, if I was teaching English, if I was like rowing a boat for 48 hours, a week. I just wanted to remove myself, out of the US and have a global experience before I went to medical school. And so I applied to Fulbright, I applied to Rhodes, Gates Cambridge, both of which I also didn't get. So again, to Becca's point, denials in one area has no connotation over your capability, over other things in your path. I always take it as like, what's meant for you will be for you. And that's exactly how I felt about the Marshall. And so, yeah, and so I got along in the same path. I was a fellowship advisor at my school, a fairly new office at Howard University at the time. I mean, I think I was the third Marshall Scholar in Howard history. And so we had a very short stint of students that had like been there and kind of gone through the application process and all of those things. And so I highly encourage you all to take advantage of your fellowship advisors, ask them so many questions. Like, I would email my advisor like every day. So like, what about this program? And that's totally fine. Use these resources, because I guarantee you at the other schools, at the Princetons, at all those other places where you think, they're better, they have the resources as well, and they're using them as well. But that goes a lot into what my next question is, which I often had, and a lot of students often ask me, did you have any moments of doubt or uncertainty when you were forming your application? And I know I don't really want to talk more about like the content of the application, but what was your approach to applying? Like, once you found this opportunity, what was kind of your mindset in applying, and what are some tips and advice you may give to students about how they should mentally approach the application process?
I can start this time. So I applied to apply. I think once I began the application process, the way that I really thought about it was, how do I tell, the story of the things that I have done so far in a coherent way that also kind of explains why I am interested in studying in the UK and why I'm interested in the particular opportunity in the UK that I'm targeting. So kind of, I was involved in lots of I played water polo. I was like interested in art. I had studied in Germany, and there were these sort of I felt like, okay, I've done all these things, but it's not as if I've been laser focused on, my specific field and founded organizations in that area and things, the way that I sort of saw some of the other people who were applying for the scholarship. And so what I did was sort of think through, how do I explain my motivations in a way that makes sense, that is coherent and compelling.
Yeah, I'd echo what Kate said about coherence. I think that's really important, figuring out, and this is very similar to when you were applying to college, right? Figuring out how to craft a narrative about yourself that kind of presents the best version that you can of your authentic self, right? So it's a kind of, you're trying to be sort of professional and public facing, but also to really allow your own personality and interests and character to shine through, and to present a distinctive voice that will be memorable to a selection committee that's reading a lot of applications, right? In just a really sort of practical way. in my case, you know, I mentioned my hostility to the fellowships advisor. I think we had a productive dialectic going where she was pushing me to sort of, you know, present a very polished application, and I was pushing back against her and trying to bring more of myself into that application. And I think that was like helpful, and I really appreciated that she provided that, because although we had a sometimes fractious working relationship, I think it resulted in a good blend. And one more thing I'd say is, you know, there's part of the application is you have to talk about a leadership experience you had, and I think that's something that people often find very intimidating. I talked in that portion of it's the format has changed somewhat since I applied, but when I was speaking about a leadership experience, I spoke about a really kind of small like policy initiative that I'd been involved in student government, right? It was super local. You know, in concrete terms, it made a pretty minor difference to the kind of campus life experience of LGBTQ students at Princeton. And, you know, but, you know, I sort of described what I'd done and how I made a change and, you know, was instrumental in that. But I think that's to say, you know, that like when you seek leadership, don't freak out. It doesn't mean that you have to have like, you know, secured elected office or something like that, right? You can think about it in a way that's relevant to your life and your experiences.
Yeah, absolutely. Ditto retweet to Emily's point there of, you know, the stories that matter to you and are things that you're passionate about are far more important to get in there than, you know, the kind of really sexy highlights or whatever, because in the end, like that's what you're going to write better about. And that's certainly what you're going to talk better about if you get to the interview stage, right? So you really do want there to be nuggets in there that are genuinely you. When I'm thinking about kind of hesitancies in the application process, I would say I had two. The first was that, and this sounds strange for someone who came to the UK in 2012 and has only returned to the US like 3 times since. I have not been home for a single Christmas. Anyway, but I'm not an Anglophile. I had not dreamed of coming to the UK. Like it wasn't the British part of the Marshall Scholarship that it was attracting me. It was this very specific nerdy water program that I was obsessed with. And so, you know, kind of visualizing myself here and thinking about how to kind of beef up the US-UK relationship, right? Especially when I'm totally obsessed with the Middle East at this time in my life, and like doing a lot of that kind of anthropology and regional studies was an interesting one. And, you know, I think I ended up at a really good space kind of talking about needing to understand how different parts of the world also view the thing that I'm interested in, and that being a really kind of meaningful reason to come here in addition to this program. So it all worked out okay in the end. And I'm still would not say I'm an Anglophile, even though I'm, you know, totally obsessed with not having to leave this country. The other hesitancy that I would say, and this is particularly ironic in that I walked into my practice interview at Michigan State before the full interview, and a professor who had been on a study abroad program leading to Israel and Palestine with me was one of the interviewers. And I had kind of made this joke to him: I'm so terrified as a result of this process, I'm going to wake up in a decade and find myself a professor of geography. Because I didn't want to be a professor. I wanted to, you know, get this master's done with and like, you know, head into the field and like, you know, do, you know, like really grounded work and blah, blah, blah. And as I was writing the Marshall and going through this process, like so much of me was realizing how valued and valuable the work that a lot of my professor mentors were doing, you know, who were kind of leveraging and straddling the space of academia, activism, scholarship, policy, and that kind of thing. And I realized those were the shoes that I wanted to be in. And it was very angsty for me at the time, because that's not what my perception of self and my intended trajectory had been for, at that point, 3.5 years of undergrad. And so I was really like, no. And yet the writing of the essays kind of forced me into this kind of self-awakening, if you will, about kind of what made sense next. And it's a decade later, and I'm a professor of geography. So Eric and I regularly laugh about that moment and be like, oh, okay, well, at least it was foreshadowed and I had some warning. And by the way, I absolutely love my life. So I'm very pleased for that particular, you know, kind of shift of things. But it definitely I think if you're doing the application, as Kate and Emily were talking about, and pulling all of these threads together and trying to come up with a coherent message of kind of, how the hobbies, the scholarship, the random extra minor or whatever kind of all come together, there may be a moment when you kind of have this wake up moment that doesn't quite feel like you, or is kind of writing a new version of yourself, that is different than how you've been used to telling your story. And that's really exciting and meaningful, but it can also, be challenging, and it takes a lot of emotional work as well. So I would definitely encourage you, as you're doing this really wonderful self-focused work, in addition to the academic mentors and guides, like, do talk with friends and family and loved ones and therapists, or counselors, right? Just to kind of do those other kinds of check-in with yourself, because it really is a very holistic process, I know, for a lot of us.
Yeah, Becca, you really hit a lot of, I had a lot of similarities. To you, Emily and Kate. I was not an Anglophile. I wanted to specifically go within the Black diaspora, and that's what I was gunning for. And so when and I won't repeat everything Becca said, but really I did find that, like, once I had picked that, okay, I'm going to apply to the Marshall, and I just started Googling different things that could connect to what I liked in the UK, you'll find that there are so many different global communities and different fields that are advancing very far, and probably what you're interested in the UK. That makes it a bit easier to write that. And honestly, I think the scariest essay for me was the ambassadorial potential essay, because I saw the word ambassadorial potential and I'm like, what is that even? It sounds so vague, and so many students ask. And I think what I really noticed, and I think it was Emily who touched on this, is that you have every experience you need in the basket. Really, ambassadorship is really just representing another community somewhere else. So that can be as much as doing a summer camp, being a camp counselor in a different community, or if you did a volunteer program, I think I talked about, I tutored in incarcerated citizens. And so I had and oftentimes I was representing their stories when I entered into the free world. And I was also, bringing in kind of an ambassador of, my school in there and talking about that. So get outside of the box and just be as truthful to you as possible. You don't have to, like they were saying, craft these daunting narratives. Really just use what's already a part of your life. And I found too, the application process to be very therapeutic. And I talk about it all the time. I think Becca's heard this story a billion times. But I really just approached the process okay, who am I? And I kept asking myself that a lot. And I would revise essays, and there would be sentences there that I wrote. And I'm like, that's something I would have written for a professor, but not for me. And so, but what happens is when you put your truth in your story and you really just think what do I want to do? Why am I here? Those kinds of questions, you find so much confidence when you finish producing the application that you're just I don't even care. Whatever I put out there is me, and I'm okay with whatever comes after that. And so that's just my very long-winded of advice. Before I ask the next question, I just want to plug that you all can drop questions in the chat or raise your hand or unmute if you have any questions in between our questions as well. I'll give a quick pause just in case anybody wants to. All right, cool. We'll go into the next one. So my next question, okay, we've gone through the application process. Now we're in the UK. We're all Marshall scholars and we're in school. Tell me, what are some of the biggest differences in academia between the UK and the US that you noticed as a student and that you had to transition and shift to while you were in school?
I'll start with grades. This may be the easiest one to do, but so the grading system in the UK is very different. It is technically on a scale of 0 to 100, except a 70 is a first, which translates to, is the highest grade you can get in terms of then when it transfers into their version of the grade system, which weirdly is first, second, high, third, second, first, 2-1, so high second, 2-2, low second, third, fail. I mean, it's very strange. Thank you, Oxford and Cambridge. Really kind of makes no sense to those of us who are but scales, with the same kind of unit between them. But that's all right. And so that first moment, kind of getting a piece of graded work back from a professor, right? And seeing the number 72, right? And like every part of my American, you know, straight A neurotic self was just like ready to go, you know, defenestrate myself. Going like, what is this? And like all of the feedback was brilliant, right? And it was really, really helpful. And I've still never really managed to get past the gut check. I now grade in that system, and I still, like, it hurts me to even write it on students' papers, which is really strange. And it's just, you know, a completely different kind of system. And once you get used to it, it's fine. And you will get that feedback and whatnot. But it's just kind of, and that translates into other spaces, right? Where the kind of feedback you're getting or what you're being told is just on a different scale, or, you know, a slightly different mode of like where the lens is. And some of that is true, you know, anytime you're doing cross-cultural work. But I think it's just especially jarring when you're in an English-speaking academic system and you're kind of like, it shouldn't feel this strange. But there really are genuine differences, which are exciting, but very, very different. And Emily and Kate, I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more specifically about kind of classwork and that kind of thing and some of the differences that tease out there.
Yeah, just echoing what Becca just said about, like, I think that we can sometimes trick ourselves into thinking that we expect the UK to be similar because it, you know, we understand the language if we're native English speakers, or, you know, we've been operating in an English speaking medium, and we go over here and we think it's going to be the same. And I think the biggest trick is to prepare yourself for the fact that it's actually going to be very different, and to approach it in the same way as if you were, you know, going to a country where English is not the medium of instruction, and, you know, where we're sort of more expecting to encounter cultural difference, right? Because you will encounter cultural difference in the UK, and it depends on where you are also, right? You're going to have a different experience in, you know, a massive globalized multicultural city like London, or indeed some of the other cities in the UK, than you will in, you know, a sort of a campus in the middle of nowhere, effectively, or, you know, which there are a few in the UK, though not as many as in the US, or in somewhere like Oxford. And so most of my experience, I work in part on the history of higher education in the UK, but most of my actual experience studying and like working in a teaching sense in higher education in the UK has been in Oxford and Cambridge. Oxford and Cambridge are very anomalous universities within the overall higher education sector, so my experience isn't representative. And I would encourage everyone to consider the wide spectrum of UK higher education. There are a gajillion universities in this country, and really think beyond Oxford and Cambridge, and also I mean, there's wonderful institutions in London that, you know, can be really suited to particular research interests that folks have, but you know, there's a whole country out there also, and, you know, lots of universities that you might not have heard of, but that can be like the best possible place to study a particular thing. You know, like what Becca was saying earlier about UEA. But that all being said, you know, I think the thing that I found most difficult to adjust to in Oxford when I was doing my master's was really just the low number of contact hours. And also, honestly, like the, in some ways, the lower standard like of ability that was expected from the students, you know, having come out of an elite American college where I had written this very intensive undergrad, like independent research project, and also was like getting a lot of personalized attention from my professors. You know, Princeton is pretty much a liberal arts college. And if you were like the bright student who was, you know, sort of putting in work and being successful, professors had a huge amount of time for you. And that is not the case in Oxford, which is a massive university with tens of thousands of students. And it's also in some ways like a question of the transition. It's in some ways a question of the transition from undergrad to grad school, and you're sort of expected in grad school to, you know, work more independently and not need as much support. But it's also partly the culture here, where they're just, every student in UK higher education has fewer contact hours than are standard in, you know, a small private college in the US. You know, I'd have a class, say, for maybe 2 hours a week. I'd be in class, right? Max 4 hours a week. And honestly, one of the most challenging things was just figuring out what to do with my time the rest of the time that I wasn't in class. Like going from the US, where I was taking 5 classes a semester, to a system where I only had 1 class a term. And then just like figuring out what to do with my day. And I find that very difficult and sometimes very like lonely and isolating. But it sort of wound up being good preparation for, you know, the academic research lifestyle that I've had sort of since then, which has involved also a lot of like self-directed work and you know, less contact in a sort of structured way.
So this is another place where I think my experience was probably a little different because I did a STEM research degree. So the big difference between US programs and UK programs for my degree was that there was no coursework. In the US, you know, you do rotations in labs. There are required courses for your first couple of years as a PhD student. That doesn't exist for STEM PhDs in the UK. You just go right into your research lab and that's like all you do. So it works better for US students who have had a significant amount of undergraduate research experience, which I did, but there are still big downsides because you don't get a chance to actually try out the lab before you commit yourself to a 3 or more year program in it. In terms of kind of day-to-day life, though, life as a UK STEM PhD student, I think is quite similar to the kind of once you get past your first couple of years in the US, you know, there's an expectation that you will, I didn't need to find ways to fill my time. Like there was an expectation that I would be in the lab for 10 hours a day, probably 6 days a week. Although maybe a little bit, I think there was a little, one of the things I liked was that there was a little more of an expectation that you would have a life outside of your research lab in the UK than I think there is in many US programs. And there was an ability, like I was at an external research institute, but at Cambridge. So I kind of had my research institute community, but also was involved in other extracurriculars and in my college life at Cambridge, et cetera. Yeah, so I think, you know, all of that to say, like the main issue, I think, for US students going into these STEM PhD programs in the UK is it can be a kind of a big transition, particularly for those who haven't spent a lot of time in a research lab previously, and also maybe haven't had as many of the advanced courses that many of your European UK counterparts will have had as undergraduates, because their undergraduate degrees were typically more specialized.
Yeah, retweet on everything everyone else said. Just a couple of weird quirks. I found out they call professors by their first name a lot here, and that threw me off because I'm so in America. It's like if I'm doctor, like call me Dr. X, and like so like I'm like Dr. and they're like, oh yeah, so Joe, so what's going on? And I'm like, oh my gosh. So that's been an adjustment. Like everyone was saying, more independent. And I also found this is something new for me, at least at my university in undergrad. Like if you needed an extension or a little bit of time on your work, you talk directly to your professor, and like the professor would do those leniencies and did those grading themselves. But at my university in London, you have to apply to, there's kind of like a university body that handles all deadline extensions and point deductions, and you have to apply for extensions through them. Like the professor has no control, and then they grant it and they make the point adjustments at the end. And grading is also not done often by a singular professor, but maybe a group of university like faculty, like professors that are relevant, but a team often, because they may have like they have some kind of grading rules where 2 people have to grade it instead of 1. So just those differences were kind of new to me, and something that I kind of found out through like trial and error, especially with COVID and kind of needing more extensions and the pandemic being a lot. And so that was something tricky to navigate that you can take with you. I do leave some time for audience questions, so I'm just going to ask one more question for the panelists. What are some fun, cool things you got to do in the UK and with the Marshall program, either with Marshall or outside of Marshall, that like really stand out to you about your time there?
So, you know, I did some of the formal martial things. That wasn't like where I found my home to the extent that I did at all during my master's. And that's like there are these all sort of maybe, Becca, I think could probably say more about this, like, lots of trips and sort of get-togethers that the program sort of collectively organizes, which I think can be really fulfilling and rewarding for people who, like find their people there. Something that I did that I would never have done otherwise that has like made an ongoing difference to my life is I joined a choir in the chapel of my college at Oxford. And I think something that is very different here, I think it is a cultural value in Britain generally, and then particularly it's been my experience in Oxford, that there's a sort of culture of amateurism and a real welcoming of sort of getting involved in activities at a very like beginner's level, whether that's like music or sports or, things like that. And, I had played string instruments very seriously as a child and basically like hadn't been able to continue at Princeton because I wasn't good enough to get in the orchestra. And this, like, I was able to come back to music as a total beginner, walk on, no audition. They were just like, yeah, come sing, you're an alto, great, stand here. And I, sang in this choir for 2 years. I got much better at singing. I went on tour to France, it was a really wonderful opportunity. And it kind of also like reawakened my interest in classical music again, that I had kind of not been able to pursue in college. And, that's still something that I'm really engaged with. Not going to say there weren't like limitations to the social scene of like Oxford students singing in the chapel choir, but, there were lots of reasons why that was a really rewarding experience. And I think this, like, the UK university setting can be a great way to become involved in an activity that you wouldn't be able to just kind of jump into in an American college setting. And people play sports. You can also, like, if you play a less popular sport, like, say you play like a sport that's not popular here, like say you play basketball or something like that, like you can play for the university, like there's no rules. People like the Oxford University basketball team is Americans, who just kind of turn up and are like, hey, I'm going to join in, right? Or, something like hockey or like certainly baseball. One of my friends who was a Rhodes Scholar here, she was my flatmate, and she had played softball like as a child, and she joined the university women's cricket team because they were like, oh, you can throw a ball. Welcome, and I think like those opportunities are actually really fantastic.
Yeah, just building on that, I was one of these people who played a sport, and that was really important for my experience at Cambridge. I had started college as a varsity swimmer actually, but then was too burnt out, didn't want to keep doing it, and played some water polo in college as a club sport, and then got to Cambridge, and like as Emily was saying, you can just join the university's teams. People don't take it as seriously. It's a great way to kind of meet people and represent the university, but not spend all of your time doing it. So I joined the water polo team. They like saw that I was good at swimming. So they were like, oh, you should like be on our swim team too. And then I joined the triathlon team. And through that I met kind of my best friends while I was there as well, who were in all kinds of different fields. But we got into open water swimming, and we would travel all around the UK to like the Lake District or, do ocean swims. And we did a couple of swims in other parts of Europe too. Became really close with them. And it was a great way to find a community of, mostly British people for one thing, which I really appreciated, because my graduate program and of course the Marshall, I wasn't around that many British people. And also people, who were not studying the same thing as me. It kind of removed me from my academic life, which was very welcome because I did spend a lot of time in the lab, as I mentioned as well.
I'll maybe talk a bit about the Marshall Scholars community, since that hasn't come up yet. One of the very cool things about the Marshall program is that it is any subject in any university in the UK, right? Which means that once you're a Marshall Scholar, there is this network of couches all across the islands, as well as really fun interdisciplinary mixes and that kind of thing. And as Emily has talked about, you can kind of engage as much or as little with that as you want, and kind of, you know, finding your people and your communities while you're here. But if you do find your people and want to find your people within the Marshall, there's a lot that we do in non-COVID times. Sorry, Michaela. Michaela's been in lockdown most of the time she's been in London. But we found really fun ways to do Zoom cooking classes together and all kinds of things. But in non-COVID times, the Marshall Scholars will host a big 100-person Thanksgiving potluck. We will play a quote unquote friendly rival game of football against the Rhodes. We will do a retreat in the summer at a Georgian manor house in the Scottish Highlands. We will do some trips to the theater and that kind of thing. I think probably one of my favorite moments was the production at Shakespeare's Globe Theatre of Midsummer Night's Dream. And a Marshall, a few years older than us, actually was in the show and had helped kind of do the creation of the show, because in this particular version, Helena, the character in Midsummer Night's Dream, who is in love with Demetrius and is like a bimbo who's just like pining pointlessly after this dude the entire time, they gender bent and turned it into a commentary in which the language that Shakespeare gives to Helena makes a lot of sense when it's a gay lover trying to convince Demetrius that they, you know, it's okay for them to be in love, and that he doesn't need to go marry Hermia and then perform this kind of fake love and everything. So it was just really brilliant to obviously, one, share a night at the theater with friends and be able to talk to Angie about, you know, kind of doing that work in theater. And then his experiences from the Marshall and everything. And British theater is just so much more willing to experiment and do fun, weird things than the kind of blockbuster Hollywood version that we often have in a lot of the more kind of Broadway hit musical bashes in the US. So that's definitely one of my favorite parts of British life, I would say.
Yeah, that was great. Just to close, I hope you close on this and open up for quick questions. Just know that when you are a Marshall, you're not just a student. And as you can see, a lot of the enrichment of the experience comes from socialization. I just got back Monday from going to the barn in Somerset, which is kind of like very rural, nothing around. And we spent like a weekend at a barn with a bunch of my fellow Marshalls, getting involved in volunteer programs, sports, even social activism here. There are so many ways and so many things that you should, you know, just take some risk and listen to that make this experience even more than just a degree. And now I just want to open it up in case anybody has questions that we didn't answer. I know we talk a lot. Thank you for taking time to speak with us today. Oh, no problem. It has been really wonderful to hear about your experiences. Did you all enter the Marshall Fellowship directly as undergraduate? I did.
I did, but lots of people don't. There were several people in our class that had taken a couple of years out.
Yeah, same as well. There are some people in my class that took some years out. So you can totally, if this is something you're like, not really right now, but maybe later, absolutely apply until you can't. I think the cutoff's maybe 3 years after an undergrad or something. It's on the rules on the website. Yeah.
I would say too, just to add to that, so one, it may be, you know, that you have a really cool job offer and you want to go do that for a few years and then, you know, kind of come back to it. Absolutely. It may be that you apply this year and didn't get it, but really want it. Apply again. People also, I think I have 3 Marshall friends who on their 3rd time, right? And, you know, they just kept recrafting and were building other kinds of experiences and figuring out, and it really was the right thing for them, but it wasn't the right thing then for them, right? And they've seen that now as well. So don't be disheartened. And, you know, if you really are set on this, like, please keep trying. And that's one of the really wonderful aspects of diversity for the program as well, right? I mean, it's very good for those of us who have only ever been in universities to have friends who remind us, you know, that not all of the world works that way and that kind of thing. And some of, you know, the absolute kind of character superstars of Marshall classes in past years have been those kind of 2 or 3 year out, right? And it's also really kind of beautiful cross year, within the class mentorship as well that is created, right? As we all are coming in with different kinds of experiences.
I'll just add to that, like, conversely, if you are still a current undergrad and are applying as a, rising senior in college, doing a fellowship like this that's, for a year or 2 years can be a great way to buy yourself some time to figure out what you want to do longer term, right? So, it can be something that you want to come to after you're like, as Becca was saying, like after you're kind of had some different experiences and are more certain like that this is the opportunity you want to pursue, or, you sort of kept trying for a couple of years, which is very valid. But it could be something that you're applying for, because you're coming to the end of college and you're not actually sure what's next for you. And you want to keep exploring, and maybe, and something I didn't say earlier was that I wasn't sure whether I wanted to do a PhD in history. And one of the reasons that I wanted to do a master's was to see if grad school was right for me. And like things like that, are really important as well, and reasons why we might be applying, whilst we're still in college. Yeah.
Are there any other burning questions? Or it's just some info.
Maybe while we're waiting for more questions, just one thing that I think we haven't talked about that, is particularly kind of on my mind as somebody who's further out from my Marshall is the community, like the Marshall community and broader community that I established while I was in the UK continues to be very important for me. Both on the, like some of my most important friendships are still with the friends I made then, and also just professionally, the Marshall network is great. It's helped a lot with career opportunities for me, particularly as I've looked to pivot from, one sort of sector to another. So yeah, just as a plug for the longer term benefits.
That's really, really great. Yeah, I agree. Like the network is freaking so fantastic. I made a switch this year to apply to drama school after my medical anthropology degree. And it was a fellow Marshall, older alum. His name's Garrett, and he's a working actor and did musical theater here. And he helped me so much with my application and audition work. So yeah, the Marshall network always comes in so much handy. There's another question. How did you decide on your institution / program, and how many universities did you apply to? I'll just quickly run through. So the Marshall is super cool because when you're doing the application, you pick your first and second choice for your first degree. You pick your first choice for your second degree. That's if you're applying for the 2 year. If you apply for the 1 year, you do a first and a backup as well for that. You explain that. And then what happens is if you get the Marshall, they kind of walk you through the application process. So you fill out the application, they help you get everything, and then they submit it on your behalf. And it really helps you kind of navigate the school setting. So you don't have to apply to the schools directly by yourself like you would if, for example, Gates Cambridge. And in terms of finding institutions, somebody else can also speak, but there's a really cool function on the Marshall website called a course finder. And if you go on there, and I literally typed in like anything under the sun that I was remotely interested in, and it shows you all of the degrees at all of the schools in the UK that have it. And I just picked through and found schools and looked maybe at faculty that I liked, at what the school was known for. I wound up picking a school for medical anthropology that was leading in anthropology in the UK. And so just going by different things like that. But that course finder is a great start. You can type in anything from like art to like robots doing dances, like any, like as specific or as broad as you want, and it'll help you find some things. And if anybody wants to throw some last tidbits in the last 30 seconds.
I think I would just mention, I mean, one, absolutely, like make use of your resources via Kate and Caitlin to also kind of help you, they know the UK scene in terms of which unis are kind of best known for which fields and that kind of thing. Don't rely on the ones that you've heard of or that definitely use that course selector. And then also, if there are particular subjects that you've heard us talk about that you're like, oh, that's me, like I'll drop my email in the chat, please do reach out to us. We're really happy to kind of also let you know where our friends who studied similar things also went and kind of how that, that went. So really, really happy to help in that way. And I think it is, the more you kind of, can do some readings of it. And most of the universities are also now offering virtual open days, right? In the way they didn't used to. Some silver linings from COVID. So do take use of those and try and, kind of get an early vibe for some of the universities that you're choosing between. And that's the kind of thing that you can also write in your application, right? To show like, I've really done my homework. I know that this is the right university and here's why. And that's definitely going to be something that will make for good interview fodder, I will say.
If anyone is doing modern British history, come talk to me. Don't go to Oxford for modern British history, even though I teach there. There are better places to go. I chose the program that I did because Oxford is the only university in the UK to offer a 2-year top masters. And I was really interested in pursuing that structure of program to do one, so most marshals pursue a 2-year option, and most marshals do 2 1-year masters in that time, which is like really great. You can, mix and match different institutions and different programs, but I just preferred to do one degree. And so that's one of the reasons that I applied there. I'm not going to say it was necessarily the best choice for my academic interests or the best place to be, but it's an institution I have a super complicated and super ambivalent relationship to. Feel free to reach out if you want to talk more about that. But I did also want to say your professors in the field of study that you want to go into, if you're a major in history, and you're interested in pursuing a graduate degree in history, speak to your history professors about, where they would suggest that you might fit in, while remembering that, depending on how old they are and where they are in their career, their information might not be the most up to date. And so you should seek out other sources of information as well. And what Michaela said about searching the website is like a really, really great place to start.
I'm mindful of the time. You folks are amazing. I could hang out all afternoon, or I suppose for some of you evening, but I know you have other things to do. Thank you all so, so much. I'm really grateful. To the students listening, I'm so glad you came. Please keep being brave, keep reaching out. Please come talk. Caitlin and I are not going to put you in a headlock and make you do anything that doesn't make sense for you, but hopefully the conversation today has inspired you. Thank you all very much. And best of luck. Take care.
Good luck, everybody. We hope to welcome you here in a couple of years. We'll be here.
Good luck, everyone.
Please tell me you're going to theater school.
Well, we'll see. I've sent in my applications and I have auditions at the end of the month. And so
it's going to happen. It's going to happen. Also, Thoughts of a Colored Man, which Garrett premiered at Syracuse Stage, is the first new play being launched
on Broadway
post-COVID.
Yes, so it's crazy. It's amazing. I'm definitely keeping.
Michaela